So the case for hybrid heat pumps over like a furnace and an air conditioner, you've made it very clear to me, right?
Mhm.
What is the case then for hybrid heat pumps over just straight up full electrification?
Well, yeah, so there's a couple of key things here. One you just touched on, which is you oftentimes don't need to upgrade the duct system. Furnaces put out higher temperature air, so they move more heat with the same amount of air than a heat pump can. So a heat pump's usually putting out somewhere between 90 and 110 degree air, and furnaces run between 110 and 140. But say 40, 45 Celsius, something like that, is where we're getting into with the heat pumps and furnaces where they kind of flip over. So most houses you don't need to adjust the ductwork and you can put a hybrid in. So that makes things far simpler. Uh, you also don't have to worry about reducing the load of houses. So if you have an old leaky home in a cold climate, you can keep the furnace and stack a heat pump on top. There was a lovely study that came out right about 2 years ago, I want to say, that had it was 3 or 4 homes in the Toronto area. And the one that was the worst was built in the 60s, which means it's most likely quite leaky. It was around 3,000 square feet, and it got the hybrid system I'm discussing. So a basic single stage heat pump on top of a basic single stage furnace, nothing exotic. Reduced gas usage 55%. So
Remarkable.
that's basically a worst case scenario, and we still saw a 50% reduction in gas use, which is kind of wild. So that can be our goal or not. To me, like I said, we just belabored the point of comfort. And that to me is why you want a hybrid first and foremost. But on the electrification front, yes, we don't need to play with duct systems nearly as often. I'm not going to say never, but much less than we have to think about them with heat pumps. You can put them in any home, regardless of how old or leaky it is, as long as it has a duct system and a duct system that can carry the airflow for the furnace. And another critical point is there's a lot of discussion about panel upgrades, and we don't need to do panel upgrades anymore.
Okay, right, with the
So,
hybrid.
yeah, if you have an air conditioner, you use the exact same breaker, the exact same capacity to make it a heat pump. So you have the capacities. A 100 amp panel will do the vast majority of homes with a hybrid, where when you want to fully electrify a reasonable size home, you typically need to move to a 200 amp. So not always. Like I've done 3 electrifications for clients on 100 amp panels, one with an EV, and then one of my own electrifications here called Moth Manor, our latest Airbnb, that is on a 100 amp panel. So it's possible, but it's challenging. But upgrading that can be it's a significant expense, but then it's also a significant project management challenge.
Mm-hmm.
So now you have to find the electrician and schedule it and get that done beforehand. I mean, with 85% of replacements being emergencies, people don't want to screw around waiting for that. You can just put the hybrid in and move on.
Yeah, and it's also not just a panel upgrade. My understanding is at your home, chances are sometimes you might have to upgrade a feeder, like a line from the utility, and a transformer on the street that you're on, depending on where you're on. And so a lot of that timelines and stuff like that are out of your control, I
Correct.
imagine, right? If you're doing potentially a full electrification as a retrofit. And also, what's the likelihood that your furnace and your air conditioner breaks at the same time? Like very slim. Would you even know? Typically, your air conditioner would break during the warmest months, or like the
Yeah, they're
first.
6 months apart.
Yeah, yeah.
Give or take. I mean, they're opposite seasons, opposite times of the year. Yeah, so you'll lose one season and the other the next season. I mean, we're coming out of cooling season right now. I just was at a supply house yesterday getting some stuff for a neighbor's project, and I asked, like, so have you started selling furnaces yet? Not quite yet. We haven't had the cold night. So although we have had a couple of cold nights, but it was early enough that everyone's like, yeah, that's not going to stick around. We'll get the cold night in another week or two, and everybody's going to be like, it's October, it's getting cold, better turn the furnace on, and that's when things
Boom.
conk out. Yeah, where the last time around was probably May here. And depending where you live, like Louisiana, I made a post and said, well, the air conditioner runs 3 or 4 months a year. And I had some Southern friends giving me just a rash of crap over that. Like, dude, like I run my furnace 2 months a year. Like I'm running my air conditioning in November and February. So it depends where you live, where they are. But yeah, the furnace and the air conditioner are not going to fail at the same time.
Yeah. So the hybrid systems are an easy pathway into I don't know if electrifying is the word, but like decarbonizing heat in most homes, because you can do it when people are naturally upgrading their air conditioning.
Exactly. Yes. So you can fit it into a decision that's already being made. And if you're looking at the same model, so most air conditioners have an equivalent heat pump model. Not all, but most. And so if you look at the prices of them, it's like looking at one car that has a stick shift and the other has an automatic. Or in this case, it's with and without a reverse gear, which is stupid, which is why it isn't sold that way. And why the heck is HVAC sold this way? Because why are you buying a vehicle without reverse? This is dumb. That's and I view air conditioners as intellectually stupid. I understand why they go, because they're slightly less expensive, but it's just like, but this is dumb. The engineer in me is like, this is just stupid. Why are we doing this? So in any case, if you're looking at the same model, price difference between them from the wholesale distributor is usually somewhere between $300 and $800.
US. Yep.
US, yeah. So $5,000 Canadian. Uh, it's honestly pretty similar.
$5,000 in Monopoly money. Yeah.
You got that colorful money. We have the most boring money in the world. It's just all green. But yeah, it's a pretty small price difference between them for the most part. Now, like, it's funny with the IRA incentives coming in the US, I've seen that split become $1,000 and $1,500 because oftentimes the supply chain ends up eating a good chunk of the incentives. So we're starting to see that happen. Another reason I don't like downstream incentives.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, really? Yeah.
You've never made that point before, man.
No, never before. You may need to go back an episode or two and listen to that one.
Yeah.
But
or the entire season, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Common refrain in these parts.
It's a very common refrain. Don't do downstream incentives. Okay, so from an electrification front, it'll work in any home that has a normal duct system. So like if you have a high velocity duct system, which is common in houses that have boilers, that's not, well, you can't do a hybrid easily in those. In that case, you'll just change the air conditioner to a heat pump, but I digress. It'll work in basically any house that has a regular duct system. You can put a hybrid in. You generally don't need to play with the panel. You don't need to play with the ductwork. You don't need to do shell work. There's no insulation or air sealing. So basically, you can put this anywhere and it'll work. And you don't need to do load calculations. I'm not saying you should, but realistically, 90% plus of systems are installed without load calculations. So you just, you have a 2-ton air conditioner, you make it a 2-ton heat pump. You have a 3-ton air conditioner, you make it a 3-ton heat pump. It's like for like, which is not ideal. That's not what I think should happen every time. I'm also a realist, and that is what the vast majority of systems are getting out there. But this works even with utter lack of design.
Awesome. Let me quickly summarize how far we've gotten here. Better load matching, number one, which means you're more comfortable during most of the year, shoulder seasons and leading up to like the coldest parts of the time. You're usually more comfortable relative to just a furnace. They work in any home that already has like central heating and cooling and standard duct system. You don't need to make a ton of panel upgrades at all. It's just if you're running a 2-ton air conditioner before, now you have a 2-ton air conditioner that can also heat. So it's, you don't have to do a panel upgrade or wait for your utility to upgrade service on your street and that kind of thing. You don't need to do a bunch of shell work. So that's number 5 to the home from a kind of climate perspective, I guess. If you're concerned about reducing, greenhouse gas usage in the home, you would get far, like you said, even in like the most basic install case, even in a place like Toronto, you would cut gas consumption in the home by 50%. Easily. And so you don't have to really think about insulation and air sealing upgrades, both from like that climate perspective and also from like a comfort perspective, right?
Correct.
The whole home
You're more comfortable, and oftentimes the operating costs are similar. So actually, we should touch on efficiency, but keep going.
Yeah. And then I guess the last thing is related to all this is that there's an easier entry point into decarbonizing homes, into reducing amount of gas use in homes, because for, I guess, HVAC people, it's easier to do this during emergency AC replacements, like during no cooling call. You've just like, without doing a lot different than what you would do with selling a air conditioner or selling and installing an air conditioner. Now you've sold and installed a piece of decarbonization equipment.
Yes.
Whether you phrase it that way or not, it's just much easier to sell it during even during emergency replacements, which you've said multiple times before is accounts for like 85% of all installs. Okay, so that's 6 points right there.
There's a bunch of reasons why these are really good.
Okay,
There really are.
right. I want
And
to. Oh,
go
sorry.
ahead.
Go ahead. Okay,
Um,
so you one of the things that we uh, touched on earlier was about like needing to make panel upgrades and needing to wait for like your utility to upgrade like the distributor system or whatever on your street. If you're on the end of a long thin line, maybe they'll have to increase the grid capacity, if you will.
mhm.
If a lot of people on your street are going like full electrification, at least that's one of the concerns, right? Like, can the grid handle full
Chicken Little, here we
electrification?
come. Uh,
Hey man, don't shoot the messenger. I'm just
I
reflecting
know.
things
Um,
that you hear. Yeah.
but that is a really important point here, which is hybrids do not increase grid congestion.
Mm.
Because when you get to the cold days where everyone's worried about the grid, the hybrids, because you're going to be running the furnace when it's really cold out, the only electricity the system's using is to run the fan. So there's very little peak, and there is no resistance backup, which the resistance backup is really where the challenge gets, because the heat pumps don't use that much power. It's 1,000 watts per ton. So, and a kilowatt hour is 1,000 watts for an hour. kW, 1,000 watts times an hour. Shocking. Who would have thought of this? What a strange metric. This makes no sense. So heat pumps usually 2 or 3,000 watts. So it will use 2 or 3 kilowatt hours per hour if it's running flat out. That's not that big of a deal. Resistance backup can be as much as 20,000 watts. And so that is where we get into grid challenges. But with a hybrid, we don't have to worry about that because the furnace is running. We've got fossil fuels covering the edge cases, essentially. So there's no grid congestion that comes out of this, which is nice. So like I mentioned that I'm not actually that worried about this because particularly northern grids, we have between 30 and 50% headroom on the grid, except for when the plants don't start up. But in general, we have plenty of capacity and transmission to get it done because the northern grids are primarily built for air conditioning for summertime load.
Right on.
So we could run flat out 100% electrification for 5 to 10 years and probably still not hit the edge of what the grid's capable today in the cold climates.
Got it. And so I guess it gives us a lot more time and on ramp to improve, I guess, the stability of the grid or whatever to accommodate a lot more installs than in the case of like full electrification without systematically planning for electrification, right? So if I'm heating with gas, everyone on my street is heating with gas, and I decide to go full electric, maybe all it takes is just a panel upgrade in my home only. But then my neighbor decides to go full electric, and their neighbor, right? And so like if eventually at maybe the fifth neighbor, maybe the sixth neighbor, maybe the third neighbor, or maybe the 10th neighbor, you'll get to a point where the line that's coming to my street is probably
not large enough,
not thick enough, right? For on an extremely cold day, if everyone is only running electric with the resistance heat as an auxiliary. And then the utility has to plan for these private decisions that individuals are making. And so one case for, I guess, beneficial electrification or like carefully managed energy transition is that we plan for these upgrades, and then utilities play a stronger role in doing this systematically. Because if you look at it, I think when you look at like, load growth projections, I think it's even with like lot more people driving EVs and a lot more people heating with electric heat in homes. I think the actual kind of like the percentage of load growth is fairly manageable. I think, right, between like 2% a year, 3% a year,
low single digits. Yeah, maybe 5%.
That's like at the upper end of like what we expect year on year, and that seems manageable if you're doing a systematic way. But if like individuals are just going poof electric here, then those private decisions on the aggregate can cause, I guess, like some systematic, issues of planning and maintaining. And that's where the concerns about the grid capacity come from. So what you're saying is that if I'm just swapping my air conditioner with an air conditioner that also does heating, from a grid's perspective, no one is really going to quite know or notice.
Yeah. No one will know. No planning is needed, like anywhere. You don't have to do a load calc. There's no planning on like what the breaker capacity is in the house. There's no grid planning needed. Yeah, it's kind of an easy button.
Okay.